All right. Another LSS interview. You guys know what that means. Like, you remember the policy on React content? We do it. If LSS goes live with public discussions about the game, that's reaction content. So here we are. Bryan Gottleib this time talking about Fab. Let's do that. We're not going to listen to the whole thing. It is an hour long, but let's. So we're probably going to skip over the bit about the Celebrational and that kind of thing, and jump into sort of a discussion about perceived advantage, design, things and stuff like that. But you know, because the Celebrational, there's so much coverage of it. I mean, we're not going to do it justice in one 5-minute discussion. But this, as you just make sure we're clear. This is Speed podcast, Blake's podcast. Go and subscribe. Go and watch this original video. If you're giving me a view, then this is reaction content. You should be giving that a view as well. Okay? That's the only way we keep this fair. It's the way we pass on the likes, and we take the fact that Flake has gone and done this interview. And if he didn't do this interview, then we wouldn't have this content to react to. So let's tune in, right?
Welcome back, friends, to the
Also, just before this, there's an advert for the Realm Games. Great store. Does great tournaments and stuff like that. Give them your support too. They obviously sponsor Flake. We should acknowledge that. Make sure you're recommending them too. But let's dive in.
Welcome back, friends, to the Instant Speed Podcast, episode 111, brought to you now by the Realm Games. Good friends of Flesh and Blood, good friends of the community, the Realm Games. Go check them out. More about that down the line. We're doing giveaways every single week on this show, sponsored by the Realm Games. So stay tuned for some of that information. But this time, we're coming back strong. We're coming back feeling good. Took some time off, came back from New Zealand, and I brought with me Bryan Gottleib, a senior game designer. Bryan Gottleib?
It always takes me a minute. Hold on. Yes, senior game designer, lead game developer. Those are how those break down.
Cool.
That's important, 2 titles. So for the breakdown of people not familiar, the game designers is something that always goes over. Other people who lay out the concepts for the set. They design the first draft of the heroes, first draft of the ideas and the abilities and those kind of things. They get the ideation and the creation of the set down, and then the developing team takes over, who take those raw ideas. They find out the numbers that work. They find out the version of the ability that works. They manage the play test, or all those kind of things. So that title from Bryan kind of really gives us an understanding, for those who weren't familiar with his role at LSS, which is that he both helps design all the heroes, coming up with the cards, coming up with the functions, the keywords, all those kind of things, and also is involved then in the refining of the cards into what their finished product is, working with playtest and all those other things. Important to bring up to speed on that. At smaller companies, it's normal for people to do both jobs. At larger companies, you might have those roles siloed, so that, you know, the design team doesn't get to tweak. The pros and cons are basically that it is possible on smaller teams to have a designer who comes up with a favorite concept that then doesn't get balanced out in development the way it should. And that can happen because they come up with the idea in the design stage, they really like it, and then they don't get to the point where they're critical enough with themselves to give themselves the accurate feedback they need during the development stage to truly change their ideas. Now, that's not what happens in Fab. We're seeing a lot of things cut. And also, you know, like, even from the recent James White interview, you have this idea that there was a hero before Olympia. There were 2 heroes before Olympia, which was cut because it was too powerful in the playtesting stage. Now, there are indications that maybe it stayed around longer than they thought it should, because it obviously was something someone quite liked, because they said that it was cut late in the playtesting stage, which is why Olympia's ability is so vanilla. So there are maybe hints that there's this designer-developer hat clash going on, where you can't really take the hat off and fully be developer, but it's hard to really say without knowing the interior workings. Just know from other games that is something that can happen when you have people crossing those teams together, which is why larger teams do tend to split them out. Most smaller games design companies obviously can't do that because of resources, and also just because it is good to have continuity. And, you know, it's hard to someone's time to be taken up entirely with designing new sets for the game. You need to actually also do the work of getting those sets across the line. But I thought that's an interesting moment to pause there. So let's carry on.
Just call you Bryan.
Sure.
and part-time caster, which I think is something new because you have mentioned it to me over the past year that your intention was to essentially throttle back that aspect of it. So I'm going to ask you this to sort of start off. Are you missing it? And I understand that part of it was when you told me it's like you have so many other responsibilities that this is something where the travel's going to kill you. You're more in New Zealand, but you have to be missing it.
I am missing it, but I'm also still doing it. Like it's not like I've actually fully extricated myself from it. My schedule is certainly less than it used to be when I was living in the States, but I hopped in the booth a little bit with you down in Queenstown. I have the Pro Tour coming up in LA, so that is just right around the corner. And I think I have another event on my schedule. I think I will be at US Nationals as well. So, I'm still out there. I'm still in the streets casting once in a while.
Every now and then. Why not? And we all appreciate it, of course. Some more than others. I do, Bryan. I appreciate you, but let's talk.
I think Bryan is a great caster, actually. He brings a lot of sass to the cast, as well as, obviously, in-depth game knowledge. He's quite fun to watch. He does sometimes come out with, I'll be honest, I mean, I can be critical of casters. I think Bryan does sometimes come out with some really, I'll call them spicy takes on where the game's going and things like that. But that's part of the amusement, right? It's part of the whole engagement with the casters, is when the casters say things and you're like, maybe not, but maybe yes. But, like that friction is fun and enjoyable to watch. So I do quite enjoy Bryan's casting, actually.
Talk about the Celebrational. This big 5-year basically celebration of the game, of where it has what it has attained and what it has achieved for so long.
So I'm gonna skip over the Celebrational section. I haven't watched it, but I'm just gonna summarize. I mean, the Celebrational was an amazing success. Go and watch the video if you want to hear what Bryan thinks about the Celebration. I think that'd be a really good segment. I'm mostly here to react to things like heavy hitters reception, things like perceived advantage. I've got all the segments on the videos, like Variance, stuff like that, like the design takes and stuff. And then we'll flick through the community questions. We'll see if there's anything interesting, right? But there's a lot of stuff here that I personally have been critical of in heavy hitters, and I kind of want to see how he reacts to it. I think that's kind of important, right?
Did get the set a couple days, I think it was 2 days prior to the tournament beginning. They got the cards in hand. After getting the cards in hand, I believe they had...
So this is talking about the perceived advantage, where the content creators and the people who were invited for the invitational were given the full copy of heavy hitters in advance of the set coming out. Now, just as a background, so they arrived in New Zealand. They had their event Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The calling was on Saturday and Sunday. Oh, sorry, the calling was on Friday and Saturday. And Sunday, Friday, Saturday. I'm getting the dates mixed up. But the point is, they got their cards maybe 3 or 4 days before the calling. The calling was then a sealed calling with a set that people hadn't really seen and were only going to see when the box breaks happened on the Friday. So the advantage was 3 days of foresight over what the set was before everyone else got it. Now, the criticism leveled at LSS, judge whether or not you think it's fair or not. Personally, I do think it's fair, is that some of the players who were invited to the Invitational were very, very solid contenders to win the calling. And I will say that, in my opinion, LSS kind of dodged a PR bullet. But the fact that none of the players who were top of the tables went on to win the calling, right? And I think that is actually a very, very big bullet that they dodged. And we'll hear what they say in a second, but just as a reminder, if one of those people had come in the top 8, if one of those people had won that tournament, it would have been exposing those players to risk, both in terms of people claiming that their win was unjustified, but also just in terms of them feeling like they got an advantage, or them feeling that their win was unjustified. So actually, it is kind of lucky that they didn't win, and then what Brody Spurlock went on to win was a battle-hardened. But even this battle-hardened win, some people could argue Brody Spurlock and his friends, if he showed them any of the cards, got an advantage on that, right? And, it is the case that 2 of the people from the Invitational, Viet Pham and Brody Spurlock, are both in top 4 teams of the battle-hardened, which was Team Sealed. So, there is just that reality that there was an advantage here. How large that advantage wasn't really the point of the discussion. The fact is, if you're a serious competitive game, which FAB has again and again proved it has been through its judge program, its comprehensive rules, its prize pools, you don't ever risk creating an advantage, however small or large, where a player has an advantage going into a tournament that isn't something they have earned themselves by playing, testing, etc., right? Not coming from the company. That's it. So let's see what they have to say anyway. So I just wanted to give everyone a background in case you weren't following the drama, just to know exactly what's going on.
Exactly 0 waking hours of daylight to actually utilize or play with them, because everybody's schedule was very well manicured and curated, but from 8 a.m. till approximately 10:30 p.m. every single night.
But how busy they were wasn't the point, right? Less scrupulous people would have passed on a full set of spoilers to a team back in America. That team would have then gone away and tested what they thought the best decks were and things like that, and then fed back their play testing to the person on the ground. Now, I'm not saying that happened. Everyone involved, people with integrity, protecting their relationship with LSS, but the point is to say that just because the individual person was very busy doesn't mean that there isn't other places where advantage can be gained, either through teammates or passing them information, or from those teammates themselves practicing and winning in the tournament. It's just...
So
that's if you shut it down at 10:30 p.m., which nobody did, by the way.
No.
Yep.
No, we were all, yeah.
I will say, I don't want to be too hard on folks who are like, oh, this is unfair. Like, broadly speaking, I understand where you're coming from. Yes, good. Ideally, everyone gets to sit at the same time.
Yeah. No.
Blah, blah, blah.
It's good to acknowledge
I understand that.
Yeah.
I also think that sometimes I wish people would just have a charitable interpretation of our actions instead of assuming we're just colossal dolts who don't consider anything and don't care about things like, you know, creating good tournaments and making sure things are as fair as you can possibly make them, which, by the way, you never can. There's no such thing as fairness in TCGs, just to be clear. Like, is it fair that some people have to go to work on Friday before the tournament and others get to test all day? No, that's not fair. Fairness doesn't exist. It's a myth.
But there is that difference between company-generated fairness and individual-generated fairness. Like, if my life sets it up that I can practice when other people can't, then it does become a difference between LSS-generating fairness. But I do think he is right. I think a lot of people got, I would say, more angry about this than they could have, if considering the people's characters involved and all these other kind of things. Like, my own take on it on Twitter and other places and videos was, I don't think this is going to create that much of an advantage because those people are very busy, and I don't think they've shared the cards with people at home. But it's okay to acknowledge the worries that people have, and then to obviously follow on with the exposure that it gives to the players who, you know, might then have their results and their wins called into criticism, or have, you know, angry people attacking them, because not everyone is sensible. But I do agree there is room here for the charitable interpretation on LSS that they were trying to do something incredibly cool with the Celebrational, which they achieved. The Celebrational tournament was fantastic as an introduction to a set, and just fun to hear the casters and what they've been up to and all the tweets that they were putting out about the things LSS organized for them. All that stuff was fantastic. Is it worth a potential minor competitive advantage gained by a few small players? Probably. In the grand scheme of marketing, I think it probably is. And I quite enjoyed watching it all week. I even stayed up quite late, probably later than I should, during the week to watch a lot of the Celebrational stuff. So, you know, to me, looking back, because I'm not that competitive a player anymore, the potential risk of giving these cards to people and creating disparity in results versus the gain, which is a huge 3-day sealed, constructed Celebrational, the gains far outweigh the risks. So, you know, I'm kind of with Bryan on that, to be honest.
But the idea that any of these players went into the calling with any kind of advantage, so monstrously false. I have never been more exhausted than I was after the 3 days of the Celebrational and the ridiculous.
But their friends, the people they know, like there is risk there. You have to admit there is risk there, which I think is a lot of people were responding to. They wanted LSS to know, and this is a lot of the outrage when it comes to these kind of things. People want to know that they've articulated where the line is. So these players are saying, I'm not happy that you've done that. In this case, it's probably going to be fine, but I'm scared about the precedent that you're showing me you're willing to do that in the future.
Schedule that we had, and I wasn't playing, by the way. I got to like take a moment during the day and maybe breathe, and I was just ground to absolute dust. We had every single second of our scheduled waking hours meticulously planned out, filled with activities, filled with fun, and all those players did basically terrible in the calling.
They did.
I think,
but if they hadn't,
I think
that's the thing. If they hadn't, then you've got the risk. And also, like, to be fair, they did represent two of the top 2 teams in the Battle Hardened, right? That is worth noting.
2 participants made day 2, and I think one dropped immediately, and the other was Saint, who went a little bit deeper, but didn't really put together any kind of threatening run or anything. And I'm not surprised. There was no way any of those people were ever going to do well in that event.
So the box, the wonderful gift box that was gifted to us with the playmat and a few packs.
Gorgeous playmat, by the way. If you haven't seen it, it's New Zealand, which I think is in the native tongue is called the land of the floating clouds or the shifting clouds. But it's New Zealand done up in the style of the Fab mat. And also, just to be fair, something I wholly think that they could bring to Wraith, like a New Zealand-themed island off the coast that had like Maori heroes in, would be so amazing. I'm people who don't know this about me, I'm huge about celebrating the richness and the tapestry of different cultures in the world. Like, I love, all these different cultures, Japanese, Chinese, Indian, Asian. Partly it's fueled by food, I'm not going to lie, but it's also just fueled by these buildings, this architecture. It looks so different. It comes from different places. It comes from this non-Greco-Roman style. This ritual that they've come up with for their religious ceremony is nothing like incense burning in a church. Like, all these little details that come together to form culture. And if they put in like a New Zealand themed a Maori, native New Zealand themed, I think they're all Maori, right? You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Maori is the big term for all the native individuals in New Zealand. But if there's a few different tribes, then I'm apologizing for my ignorance. But basically, if they had a native New Zealand themed set with this culture represented, that Polynesian culture, that would be so fantastic. So just the playmat's great. Go and have a look at it.
Plus the set, I still have not opened it. It is still sealed in my luggage because I did not get a chance. And
I mean, just to be fair, no one was really worried about Flake winning the calling, right? We were worried about Brody Spurlock, Viet Pham, and Mara Faris, who have all won or done very, very well at callings previously, and were then given a 3-day head start on looking at the sets that were then going to form a sealed calling, right? I'm sorry, Flake. I enjoy your content, but you've left yours sealed. It's not really a big point anywhere in this argument.
Again, like you said, I wasn't playing, but from the moment of meeting in the lobby...
Oh, no, he was casting, of course. Sorry, tangent not needed.
At 8 a.m. to, okay, all your scheduled stuff is done, the night is yours, and you realize it's 11 p.m., and you're like, okay, I'm going to go back. And everyone's like, no, why go back? There's so much to do. And I was like, you're right. When am I ever going to see you guys, this reliably again? So you go to bed at 3 a.m. and then you're up at 6. I think I averaged about a little over 4 hours of sleep a night, sustained through the 7 days that I was there.
Oh, that would kill me. I'm like a 5, 6, 7 hour sleeper. I can do 4 or 5, maybe once or twice, but any more than that, I am dead. You can't give me enough coffee to keep me awake and like coherent, really, and functional. But anyway, yeah, focus.
It was just, but it wasn't like a torturous affair. It was the fact that you want to maximize your time with amazing
just having
people.
So much fun. Yeah, exactly that.
It was great. One thing that did pop out of this is a buddy of mine, Vishra, took a very wonderful screenshot that has now made it to the internet.
So then they're going to jump in and talk about this meme. I'm not going to cover this section because it's just not about game design. I will say I found this very funny. I think Bryan, it's always this thing, like they're always gonna screen cap your worst moments, or like the moment when you look out of place, or in the UK we have a famous one where the Prime Minister dared to eat a ham sandwich, and someone caught a photo of him eating a ham sandwich. This was 1 or 2 prime ministers ago, and looking absolutely stupid about it. And I looked at it and I said, who the hell doesn't look ridiculous eating a sandwich, right, if you capture them at the right time? So I find this was funny. The fact that you can edit text in here is funny,
It has
right?
made it to...
I think Bryan thought it was a bit like, why are you taking a photo of me looking grumpy? And then he's come around to it a bit. But if you want to see what Bryan's thoughts are, what about that again, go to Flake's video. I'm focusing on the game design and tournament elements of this, focus of the channel. So if you want to see what Bryan thinks about the meme, the link to this video is obviously in the description below. Let's jump forward to the next section I want to cover, which is the heavy hitters reception. I haven't watched this video already, but Flake has handily bookmarked to the bottom, so we're kind of jumping along to the places I think are really interesting.
Good. And I want to talk about another massive success of yours, other than that picture, which is heavy hitters.
I love that photo, by the way.
Heavy hitters. I would not bullshit you, nor would I bullshit anybody. I've said this multiple times. I wasn't I was a fan of Dusk Till Dawn, but I wasn't super engaged with it. I was not engaged at all with Bright Lights.
I was not engaged with Dusk Till Dawn. I was not engaged with Bright Lights. I was not engaged with heavy hitters, but I think I know where Flake's going with this, so that will make two of us that have been won over by the set.
Because of the class and such, I still, studied it, looked into it, but I wasn't as into it. This is almost like this resurrection, this massive just spike in interest of me personally. But I've heard this from others, that this set is potentially the best.
I mean, I just didn't like it when I saw it. I was like, arena, boring, card names, boring. And then I started playing the pre-release and I realized that some of the card art is fantastic. Even on the commons, the card art's fantastic. I realized that Olympia was better than I realized in terms of theme and feeling. I've already got my eyes on a Marvel Olympia, having never played Warrior before. And I've kind of just been won over by heavy hitters in terms of how well the theme has paid off and how well the set feels. So, let's keep going with this.
Draft set that has that Flesh and Blood has. It has rejuvenated a lot of people's interest, not just in Limited, but in the game itself. What was the early perception, or how are you taking this early reception of it as being super positive? How does that make you feel, knowing that you're coming off of potentially two sets that were, I don't want to say hit or miss from a standpoint of sales or those types of...
Well, it'll be interesting to see what he says, because I feel like the reception of Bright Lights from an impact perspective in terms of effect on the meta and those kinds of things was pretty weak. And I feel like Mechanologist was not the class to do a one-class set with. Like if they'd done Warrior or, something a bit more Guardian or something like that, it would have probably broken the game, but Mech just didn't really capture as many people as it could have, despite it being cool. And I feel like, to be honest, the set was a bit too complicated, that it kind of turned a lot of people off. They didn't really want to learn how to draft it well, even though it was fun in a draft format. A lot of people use Sealed as like a gateway to test whether or not they feel like they're going to want to draft the set. And when the Sealed is the way that Bright Light Sealed was, with one really viable hero and the other heroes only being viable if you've got a very specific card pool, it turned off a lot of people at the idea of drafting the set, which then had knock-on effects to how popular the set was. And also, like, just to be brutally honest, a lot of the Majestics in the set just don't really make sense from a... Like, we've just got a quantum processor here that I opened from a prize pack last week, and it's just not really apparent how a lot of the cards and the hits and the Majestics actually work within the game of Flesh and Blood. Like, they do fun stuff, they do interesting stuff, but they don't hit heavily. They don't have as heavy a hit. Whereas Heavy Hitters comes out, and just before they get into their discussion, I want to say, like, the take on it is that Heavy Hitters comes out and everything clicks in a way that Fab does, where you see the synergies on the table, and maybe it's because it's a more straightforward set, but you see how it all comes together and it feels really good.
Metrics, but in general, just the perception that, hey, we made a set that maybe half the population are not interested. This is one where a lot of people are looking at this, spectating it.
It's interesting that he gets away with saying half the base weren't that interested. That's a lot of people, but I wonder if it was even half. Like, it could easily have been less than half of the base being interested in Bright Lights. I feel like a lot of people I know, and I am in 7 or 8 Discords, and a lot of people who would buy cases normally didn't buy cases, and that's for two reasons. The first reason is the players didn't buy the cases because they didn't like mech and they didn't see the power of the set, and the collectors didn't buy the cases because the marvels were huge misses and they didn't really care as much about having them. Well, they just went and bought a singularity because there was only one marvel they really wanted, based on how much of a miss the Marvel Majestics were. So it kind of let a lot of people down for multiple reasons, unfortunately, because it is kind of a cool and a fun set, and I do want Fab to have sets that are that more complicated and more interesting in the future.
Playing it and saying this is a true banger.
Feels good, man. It's always nice to get that kind of reception, and we took some pretty. With Bright Lights, I would say we took some massive risks. With Dusk Till Dawn, maybe we didn't take enough risks. Maybe it's the opposite problem in that instance.
I think they were very afraid of making Monarch Heroes the bad guys of the meta again. So they kind of toned down the power that they planned to give them. And that kind of let the set fall a bit flat. Bright Lights, again, those are the sort of experiments I want people taking, but they didn't really land properly either.
But there was a lot of good that came of those two sets.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was manifested in the typical fashion that you would think of a set succeeding. Certainly the niche nature of Bright Lights, it was known. Like, so you can't make a single class set and not know you're excluding a lot of the population, but it did some good things for us. It taught us some really good things. With Dusk Till Dawn, again, I think
they're going to have to do a single class set again in the future. I think one of the takeaways is if you want to add a new class to the game in 1, 2, 3, 4 years time, the only way to actually get them the amount of cards needed is to do a single class set with them where you can give them 3 heroes and you can give them 3 playstyles and you can give them all this layers to bring them up to speed. I think it'll be very difficult for them to add a new class without repeating the Bright Lights formula, and then it's just up to them to nail the set and the draft in such a way that it's fun. People want to play that limited so much that they do.
Learned a lot, particularly about the process of returning heroes to the game and what our fan base expects that to look like. We learned a lot about hiding the puzzle a little bit too deeply. We learned a lot about communicating better and staying open to the possibility that heroes may need time to evolve and get all their pieces together, and maybe thinking about how we use these sort of slow drip ramp ups a little bit better. And slow drip ramp up is a mode of hero introduction that you'll see again. I think particularly where you're dealing with really risky scenarios like we were with the return of a Light Illusionist, with the return of a Shadow.
So what he's talking about now, if I'm getting this right, is the fact that Prism was printed in Dusk to Dawn, but we see her actual weapon, the good weapon that's going to make her much more playable, not coming in until the expansion slot in Heavy Hitters, right? So that's kind of your slow drip feed where you print the hero and all the core abilities and everything, except you take away 1 or 2 pieces of the puzzle with the power puzzle so that the hero doesn't necessarily come out of the gate at 100%. And then you let that percolate in the player base and you see what they do with that 80% of the deck. And then if it's still not working, if it's still not good, then you start to say, okay, let's give them piece B, let's give them piece C, and see where the power level ends up every time we add a piece of the puzzle. I have said countless times, and I'll continue to say, the expansion slot was a fantastic decision and is potentially one of the best decisions that Fab has made around boosters since Fab 2.0. It gives them granular control over the timing of adding power boost to different heroes into the game, and it really does give them a lot of control over the meta in terms of, okay, Dory needs this 1 card to make her viable, and if we make her viable with that 1 card, that frees up space for Dromai to come back into the meta, right? That's the kind of level of control you get out of the expansion slot. So that slow drip ramp up he's talking about is actually fantastic, right? And we see that with Prism. The communication thing he's talking about is that ultimately, and some Prism players have expressed frustration to me about this personally, you know, if you think about lots of people who play Prism that I've spoken to, is that they were told there's a puzzle and they tried to solve the puzzle and then they couldn't figure out a solution for the puzzle, but they're still being told, yeah, but the developer smashed us all with it in testing. So they keep trying and trying and trying, and they can't find the solution to this puzzle. And then it comes out through some interviews that actually the devs see Prism more as like this hero who's going to be 80-20 into some decks and is going to be 10-90 into other decks. And they're okay with that because they're trialing out that design. But that's not what Prism was before. Prism was a reaction instant speed deck that had loads of tools for responding to different scenarios and being flexible and instant speed and all those kind of things, which new Angel Prism isn't. And a lot of the original players felt alienated by being told there's a really cool puzzle there that lets you do X and not being able to find it. And then when they express their frustration that they can't find it, they're not told, oh, you know, like, for example, we're seeing Luminaris now. If that had been part of the Prism playtest cycle, this slow drip feed that he's talking about, and it was known, then they could have said, oh, so we took out some pieces from her puzzle because we were worried that she'd be too powerful. Expect a new tool coming for Prism in the expansion slot soon. And that would have solved a lot of community frustration. Instead of continuing to communicate the message, Prism's this really cool puzzle, we think she can do great things. And you see that learning directly applied, and this is where kudos goes to LSS, because he's saying we're learning from our mistakes. And I want to acknowledge that that is demonstrably a fact, that LSS can be seen to be learning from their mistakes. Because Olympia, last James White interview with Fluke and Box, you can see it. You can also see the reaction to it on my channel. They acknowledge Olympia was added late in testing. They tell us what was in place beforehand, a bit of details in case they want to reuse it later on, but just an understanding of why that change had to happen. And then because they didn't want to print his payoff card and not have tested it properly, they didn't know what it was going to look like exactly, they delayed putting it in. But critically, for people who are getting frustrated about Olympia not feeling complete and having loads of gold and saying the only payoff is to just draw cards with it or cash in or whatever, they said to us, the Olympia payoff card is coming soon in some form, and that will probably be, my guess, in the expansion slot in the next set, right? That's the difference in communication between Prism and Olympia. That's the lesson that's learned. Don't tell people there's a puzzle, and when they can't find it for 3 months, just say, no, it's definitely there, because these are the best players in your community who've played Prism for years, and they're already disillusioned because the previous playstyle of instant auras has been replaced with this weird angel thing that's not quite the same. And don't get me wrong, like, the instant auras needed to go. Spectra was not balanced. Spectra was not fun, but you have to acknowledge that shift. And then don't tell people the puzzle's there when they can't find it consistently. You know, communicate that parts of it were taken out for balance reasons that are coming later, that sort of thing. So it does seem like LSS has learned from this, and it is good just to acknowledge that that is a communication issue and a design issue, and a lot of these things can be solved by just talking about, not showing everyone how a sausage is made, right, but just talking about some little bits, you know, talking about this idea. And I think it's a really cool idea. This drip feed ramp is actually a really powerful thing that the expansion slot enables. And again, the expansion slot is fantastic. So we just need to acknowledge that that is one of the things that it can do for the game.
Blade. Slow drip makes more sense. It's better than just tearing the game apart.
Yeah, for sure.
And sort of asking everything around it to deal with the consequences of that. Because I just want to, this isn't to justify or fight against anyone's perception of things like Dusk Till Dawn. But I want to be very clear that if we did not do Dusk Till Dawn in the sort of more reserved fashion that we did, we could not experience the heavy hitters meta that we are about to experience, or the meta as we saw it for the last.
So this is really interesting. What he's kind of implying is that the pieces they took away from Prism would have impact. Well, I'm saying Prism, but potentially Bolton as well, or maybe Levy. I mean, people are saying Levy is going to have a hugely powerful set after this. What he's kind of saying is that those heroes would have choked the heroes that we saw maybe Living Legend recently out of the meta. So let's just refresh ourselves slightly. So Dust to Dawn came out on July 14th, 2023. So since Dust to Dawn came out, we have had... Ultim went with Dust to Dawn. That's a bit different. So we've had Briar, we've had Lexi, we've had Icelander, all go, right? Briar got her last 2 points. Lexi got her points, Icelander got her points, right? So what he's kind of trying to say, and I think potentially we agree with him here, or I agree with him, in fact there's only one of me in the room, is that if Prism had come strong out of the gate, Lexi and potentially Icelander would not have Living Legend, so we wouldn't have had that format. Because Prism traditionally has been strong into Rangers, for reasons of just being able to present a lot of damage and a little bit of blocking and disruption. And also, Prism definitely strong into Wizard, right? So Prism definitely strong into Icelander, because they don't always run that many poppers, and you can just go full Herald aggro on them and beat them up. So there's kind of a discussion which I'm going to have in a later episode as to what LSS's design ethos is and how it ties into the Living Legend system, because really what we are seeing, and I've kind of been saying it for a while, but I don't really want to tackle it in this video because we're reacting, is what I call the design for Living Legend. And maybe they'll disagree with this, but to me, Living Legend is something that you do plan for. It is something that you design for. And in that regard, you are saying, when we print this set, X hero is going to Living Legend. And clearly they're kind of implying that that's what they've done here, is that if they printed Prism and things the way that they originally intended, then we wouldn't have had Icelander Living Legend. We might have had Lexi Living Legend. We might have had Bryan Living Legend. We've had a completely different meta that wouldn't have given those heroes the time to retire, and then they would still be around. And then them being around would have had knock-on effects on heavy hitters and how heavy hitters would feel. And I feel like, as well, I mean, if you printed a new Guardian and a new Warrior, and to an extent a new Brute, I mean, Brute's better into Illusionist, but if you printed a new Guardian and a new Warrior, the last thing you want is a super powerful Illusionist in the meta. And potentially in this meta, whatever they printed for Prism in the original idea of Dust to Dawn would have just raced to Living Legend through the opposition, and it's really not ready. If you delay it, then potentially in the future there's a place where that power does become relevant and does become. So we'll have to see what it looks like when it finally turns up. Luminaris is a big step in that direction, but I'm really enjoying this acknowledgement. I wish Bryan would come on to an interview with me and talk about stuff like this. I think we could have some really fruitful discussion about these kind of things. But maybe he's scared about me, me following up as I am with this react. Maybe me following up with the next question. Do you think those heroes wouldn't have Living Legend?
Months after the departure of Icelander, because what would have happened is that two talented heroes would have hopped right into the vacuum that these ice heroes left behind, and things sort of would have just felt like Monarch 2.0, and that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to introduce these talented heroes in a much more healthy way. And I think if you look at the balance between talents and non-talented heroes, it's in a better spot in the game than it's ever been since the introduction of talents, without question to me. And that was 100% our goal going into this kind of revamp. So, that's...
And it's interesting they've achieved that, because theoretically talented heroes should always be stronger than non-talented heroes, because they have access to the entire card pool of talented heroes, of non-talented heroes. But it's not how it works because of silo design and how the heroes are sort of made to function as individual people. So it's quite interesting that they've achieved this level of balance, which it's going quite well. I think it's going very, very well.
That's all I'll say about those two sets. I think there's good in them. I think there's bad in them. Just like there's good in heavy hitters and bad in heavy hitters. But
it's definitely good in the sets. I don't want to lambast them too much, I think Dust to Dawn has really cool art. I think it has some really cool cards. It's more frustrating that the puzzle doesn't come together when you're trying to test it. And I tried to test New Prism, and I played some Levier, and the things just didn't work the way they should. And it felt like you were getting this delayed gratification that I just wasn't here for. Yeah.
The initial response is just so affirming. It just shows that people love core flesh and blood experiences. They really do just love getting in there, melee combat, doing the traditional things and exploring all the wrinkles that still has to offer. It doesn't always have to be talented, flashy, doing new things. Sometimes you just want to play good flesh and blood.
People do like talents, but he's definitely right. One of the resounding pieces of feedback about heavy hitters is that it feels like playing core flesh and blood in its best form. And to be honest, people view WTR with rose-tinted glasses. It was a great set, but doing this history project that I'm doing at the moment, which will be coming out soon, and I'm going back and I'm talking to people who played in the WTR sealed meta, it was not that balanced. Bravo was the best deck. All of his cards blocked for 3. He could fatigue anyone. His weapon was great. It had a 60% win rate in sealed. It was fun. It was new. People were very new with the game, and obviously people have gotten better. But for the people who were cracking it and playing at the best level, Bravo was undoubtedly the best hero. We're not seeing that in heavy hitters. We're seeing a lot more broad spectrum, and the fact that it's a 6-hero set, all of these things speak of years of learning what the core flesh and blood gameplay experience is and making it phenomenal. And that's kind of the payoff is heavy hitters, which I'm drafting next week for the first time, but genuinely I'm already kind of planning to get a case and just put it on the shelf to draft when I'm grey and old in the future, because I feel like it's just promising to be a great experience.
I agree, and heavy hitter seems to have just rejuvenated a lot of people's interest and trust in that kind of experience. But beyond that, for yourselves and on LSS, based off of the performance, did you guys? Beyond that, for yourselves and on LSS's side, was there a lot more riding on this set based off of the performance? Did you guys feel like this has to be an absolute home run?
No, we weren't feeling any kind of pressure like that. We just want to make good sets. And like I said, I think in their...
This is good to hear, right? Because a lot of TCGs without a strong war chest, right, in the background, if they put out 2 sets in a row, that's sudden danger territory right now, especially for games that are like 1-2 years old. If they put out 2 sets that don't sell very well, then they start to get in very serious trouble with distribution. They start to get in very serious trouble with stores who don't want to start stocking it. Now, Fab has obviously built up a bit of collateral, and Dust to Dawn and Bright Light's obviously sold reasonably well. As well, on top of that, people do draft them and people do play with them. But, it's good to hear him say, just as a confidence thing, that there's not that pressure being like, if heavy hitters doesn't succeed, we're in really hot water. My impression through these discussions, and it could be wrong, not being privy to the internal finances of LSS, is that they're in a reasonably healthy place. They've sold a lot of cards. They have a good, healthy bit of backing. They've paid out their investors, because James said this 2 years ago, that they've paid off their investors, and the people are coming to them offering them more money, and they said, no, we don't need it. And then there are other positive signs, like they've basically retained warehouses in all the different regions to store their product. He said this in the Fluke and Box interview, so that they can store product as they need to and then drip feed it out to the market in waves rather than asking distributors to buy tons of it. And then coupled with that, they're not afraid to destroy sets if they print too much. Like, all of this just speaks of a company that's not desperate for money, right? Everfest Unlimited, for example, they're not getting it out the door, trying to get distributors to buy it just because they desperately need the cash, and then they don't care if the distributors can't sell it all, or it ends up selling for like $35-$40 on whatever because they've sold it on, and that's fine, right? So companies in distress, you start to see those fire sales, you start to see that rapid shifting of product regardless of anything. Companies that are healthy, controlling supply, destroying cards if they need to, storing it themselves because they can afford to pay the rent. Like, all of these things speak of positive signs, right? Which means that you don't have to be stressed if heavy hitters isn't a complete success, because the Brutes and the Warriors and the Guardians will buy it chasing cold foils. People will buy it chasing Marvels. There's a lot of things to buy it for, even if the sealed and the limited doesn't land exactly as you wanted, even if the power level doesn't land exactly as you wanted. That at least it has a good limited experience, or at least, all these things, there's a box ticked. And enough boxes ticked means that it's a safe product. So let's continue on.
Own ways, those last 2 sets, Dust Till Dawn, Bright Lights, they were really good sets. I think the mech fans were served really well. I think we ultimately made a great limited environment at a high level with Bright Lights. All those. The
problem was only at a high level, though, Brian. Like, that was the main criticism. It wasn't that it wasn't fun at a high level. It was that the mid tables and the low tables weren't having fun drafting it because they got very confused and they couldn't crack the puzzle on how to build a good dash deck, really, which made it problematic. Yeah,
things came to fruition, and I just, the commercial aspects of this game is important. Obviously, we need to sell cards to keep doing business. That is the way this world works. That's the way all TCGs work. You have to have people interested in it. Ultimately, though, our core driver is always going to be make a great game and get more people to play the game and experiment, introduce new ways to play the game, figure out what people like, what they don't like. And only by doing that kind of experimentation and being open to the possibility that, yes, this may not sell as well, which if you're not thinking that about bright lights, like, you're just not really paying attention. If you make
but it's good for them to say it. Like, this is the sort of transparency we're talking about. We know bright lights didn't sell that well. We know people, like, I know I have a lot of feelers in the community of people saying I didn't buy, but the companies come out and say it, look, it didn't sell that well, but that's okay. The point is, and one of the reasons that people have a lot of faith in LSS as a games company is that they have said on multiple occasions that making the game is more important. And what that tells you is, you know, they could put out 4 sets a year. People would probably buy it. They could put out 5 sets a year. I think 4 sets is their plan. They could put out like secret lair products and stuff like that. They could do that, and they probably would make money from them. If the Marvel heroes or an alt art Marvel hero was done in a secret lair like product, they could probably make a killing, right? But it's not about that. It is about making the good game, and sometimes you do have to experiment with something like bright lights to reach an understanding of what the game is. And it's important just to acknowledge, we're going to finish this segment because I know I've spent a lot of time building more in the segment, but there's so many interesting little nuances in what he's saying that I feel like need to be elucidated. Fab is, for what it's worth, a game that kind of stands roughly alone in terms of design, factional design, those kind of things. Like, in my mind, the only real equivalent I can think of to something like Bright Lights is looking at something like Vice Sports and looking at one of the sets for one of the less popular animes, right? Where you're printing a set and you're like, people aren't really going to like this, but we've got this deal and it works with it, and this subset of people are going to really like it and they're going to spend X and that's going to be fine, right? But with Fab, because it's not following the magic formula, it's not this is our Ravnica set. You know, there's all these kind of things. This is our latest set on this plane. We're going to this plane, that plane, this plane. It's kind of jumping around and trying new things. This is a 6-hero set. This is a 4-hero. Like, it's got to try a lot of these things because the template for what looks good for Fab isn't really learned in the same way that it could be if you were just a Magic clone or a clone of another previously used game system or that kind of thing. So, yes, they need to experiment with bright lights, and it's good that they're experimenting with it, even if, as he admits, it didn't sell as well as they might have hoped or as well as other sets did. They can control that. They can control the supply and obviously, you know, make sure the cards are available or find a way to use those cards in the future by printing a new version of Max or, you know, a few more new Majestics in the new Fantastic expansion slot, which I can't stop talking about.
Set with only one class in it, there's a possibility it doesn't sell as well. Obviously, that was contemplated, but you can't let that drive you off ideas if they're going to be useful to the game in the 100%. Long term. And
when they bring in Druid, it's going to be a full class set because they're going to need to give us the Earth Druid that casts magic. They're going to need to give us the Shapeshifter Druid, and then they're going to need to give us like the Eldritch Druid, right? That gives like hex tokens to their opponent, right? And fills the kind of witch archetype. I'm just saying, there's going to be a 3 Druid set. It's going to come out at some point in the future. You've got to have faith. Like, you've got to be committed to your beliefs, like I am, and like Bryan is. He's committed to his belief in making great Fab, and you know that the set's going to be good. And sometimes you have to experiment with things. And I'm committed to the belief that Bryan and James are going to give me a Druid sooner or later because it's a core fantasy archetype, and I think a lot of people want to see it. So, you know, we're just rolling with our beliefs at this point.
Having that kind of mindset meant that going into heavy hitters, it wasn't like we were desperate for a home run. We wanted to just make another great Flesh and Blood set. That's always what we set out to do.
Well, you've done so, and you mentioned
doing a set with 3 of the core classes that people are really keen on is probably likely to be a home run, and people are responding with with you know, increased enthusiasm because they played Dorinthia, they play Rhinar, and they've played Guardian for years, and that makes it likely that these sets will do well, which is clearly part of the calculus that's going on here.
To me, something very that I want you to tell the listeners here is that when I was asking you about the success of this, and I said, when did you internally know that you had something special? And you mentioned that there was a lot of behavior within the testing environment that just kind of clicked in your mind. You're like, we've got something here. Can you tell everybody what that was?
Yeah, I've been sharing this story in a few places, but it really was a very clear moment. It was the first time the entire dev room was gathered around an ongoing match, and there was a clash. And I don't remember the exact circumstances of the clash. It may have been a trounce clash where there were two clashes on the line with huge stakes. It may have been something like a warrior clashing against a KO and just needs to hit one time to pull out the game and steal it from nowhere. Something along those lines. But the clash happens. The unexpected or exciting result occurs, and the room just erupts. There's just the place, and I'm like, yep, that's it. Like, that is exactly what this set is supposed to do. It felt.
I've had this happen at a pre-release. The impact in a warrior mirror, or even like if you're just playing warrior of an agility token, is so insane that if you clash with someone for agility, and you get that win when you didn't expect to, like you're clashing with a brute, your turn can go from this blue threatens 3 damage to this blue threatens 4 damage. And if people are on late game, like that 4 damage turns into 1 card, 2 cards, so 4 damage, 2 cards. But if those cards are attack actions to block 2, suddenly those Centauri Sabers, that's a full hand block. This set is full of moments like that, which is why I've enjoyed both the pre-releases I went to. My concern is how many of those moments translate into CC. But as I've said before on this, when I've been talking about Bright Lights, if the price of having what I'm saying is giving me vibes of being the best limited set I've seen in Flesh and Blood to date, if getting that and the trade-off for that is that I don't get massive CC impact, which I'm not saying I think there will be massive CC impact, but I'm saying if the trade-off for that was that I had to not get massive CC impact, I'd do it. I'd do it again. I'd do it again and again and again. I'd do it every time, and I'd let the next set in the expansion slot and stuff pick up the slack later on. I'd just do it.
Like we were in the arena with the crowd going wild, and it just embodied everything we were looking for, and it was very clear we were onto something special at that point. And it's really funny too. I think Heavy Hitters has this very unique trajectory for me in the history of my time developing Flesh and Blood sets. Oftentimes you start with an idea, you work really hard on it because you're inspired by this flame of passion, this exciting thing, and you work through the realities of it, and you've just spent infinite hours on it. It's all you've been thinking about, and you're just like, your excitement level starts up here, and as you kind of get ground down, it starts to fade a little bit, and you start to doubt a little bit, and that's just, I think, a very natural way for internal hype to go when you're working so tirelessly on these products. Heavy Hitters was the exact opposite for me, where I was like, on its face, this is a little safe. I don't know if players are looking for that. I don't know if they want the core experience, if they need something flashy to really draw them in. And then I played with it, and I played with it, and I played with it, and my hype just kept escalating because of things like the mechanics, because of how much fun it was to play. And that's different. That's different for me. And again, a sign to me that maybe we had a hit on our hands.
Must be a very good feeling. And I will say that, like, people want core fab, especially after Bright Lights and Dust to Dawn. I think there was 100% appetite for a core fab set. Now, I don't know how long that appetite stays for. I don't think you could do 2 heavy hitters in a row. I think next set people are going to want something interesting. So I think there's speculation we're going to get this all arcane set that James White talked about at one point, which, could feature like Wizard and Illusionist and Runeblade, for example, as 3 heroes that have all played around with arcane damage. And I think people will enjoy that more after having heavy hitters. I think if we went straight from Bright Lights into that, I think people might have gotten a bit fatigued, things like that. But I think if we go from that, from heavy hitters into that, people are going to be like, okay, cool, we've had the core fab. If we want to, we can go back and draft it, play around with that in limited. And now we've got the new fab, the competitive fab coming out again, where it's this really interesting constructed set with really interesting really interesting arcane damage and auras and all this other kind of stuff kicking off. So if they do this by coming into a next set that is not core fab and branches out a bit, I think that's a good tempo for the game to assume for like the rest of its life. I think 2 sets where we do fun stuff and cool stuff and bright light stuff, Dust to Dawn stuff, and then back to maybe every 3rd or 4th set it's just core fab, like arena fighting, good attack actions, block cards, like all this kind of stuff. I think that's a really good tempo that they could establish. But, maybe they don't need that anymore because now we have heavy hitters. Maybe they just keep heavy hitters in print for a while, and if people want that core fab experience, heavy hitters basically becomes the fab core set 2.0. So, WTR 2.0, History Pack 1 2.0. And, just as people... Because the thing is, I would... Just to wrap up the heavy hitters section, because I know this bit's gone on quite long, I would not feel at all nervous introducing a new player to Fab using heavy hitters. And I couldn't say the same about Dust to Dawn, Bright Light. And I know Dust to Dawn's a supplemental set, so it's a bit different, but it's a 4-hero set. You could theoretically have introduced people to Fab with it. And I would feel a bit nervous, I think. And I would also feel a bit nervous introducing people with Bright Lights. I think Outsiders was good for introductions. I think Uprising was good for introductions. Dynasty as a supplemental set was a bit, it is a supplemental set. But I think if I'm thinking about the best way to teach someone to play Fab, previously I would have grabbed my Dorinthia versus Reinhardt starter, which is, a fundamentally a fantastic Fab experience for many of the same reasons that Heavy Hitters is. It's just focused on attacking, blocking, efficient turns, and using your cards very well. And I think if a new player comes to me and says, what set am I going to buy? And I think about all the sets that have come out, what's available, even if I say, what's available doesn't matter. Say they had access to every set in the game. I might potentially still say Heavy Hitters at this point. I just feel like the puzzles are there. There are synergies. The synergies reveal themselves by playing the deck, which is fantastic, right? When you clash the first time with one of the cards that gives you an extra bonus if you clash, it feels fantastic. When you realize that KO discarding a blue agile windup gets a might and an agility token. There's these loads of these little puzzles that give very visceral results, immediate results, and reward you for lining things up and playing well. And the core theme of Thab, which is good attacking, good blocking, good value, is so prevalent there that it creates a fantastic experience. You have the set where blocking with 2 cards that block 3 and then swinging the 2 for 6 is the correct decision, because the 2 for 6 and the blue that you pitch for it both block 2. And then you get to late game where everyone's done that because it's efficient, and suddenly most of your deck only blocks 2, and suddenly you're in a completely different value game. This is peak core Fab for me. And I feel like that's why I say if I was teaching a new player, I would be grabbing Heavy Hitters and I would be saying, this is good. And that's not to disparage things like Welcome to Wraith. I still have very fond memories of Welcome to Wraith. Obviously, Uprising with my boy Fi. I think Outsiders is a pretty good experience. But I feel like as a new player introduction, Heavy Hitters works very, very well. And I feel like there's depth to be mined there in terms of the heroes and how powerful they are and what they're bringing to their classes and their existing archetypes. So yeah, I think Heavy Hitters was fantastic. I think Bryan and the team can not rest on their laurels because they've got to be busy getting to work on the next set if it's not finished already. And I want to see more from them. But I feel like with this one, we can give credit where credit's due. And I think I would say they've given a good one. All right, so that's the Heavy Hitters set. Obviously, that took a long time, but there was a lot of really, really interesting things said in there that I think were worth analysis. The next section is called Increased Variance in Fab, which we are going to look at. Then there's a section called Card Names, and there's a section called Bad Takes, which I want to listen to because I have a feeling that it kind of applies to me, maybe, and other people that I talk to a lot on Twitter. So we're going to watch those 3 sections. And then on the community questions, I might skip that and just say, look, if you want that color, I'll kind of skip through it and see if he's talking about design issues, and we'll catch up with those. But I don't want to get caught up in how big's your shoe size and questions like that, like we did with the James White video. So let's hear about increased variance in a Fab now, and dive into that and see what Bryan has to say.
You definitely did, and I'm going to be having an episode down the line with Hayden Dale regarding variance and the object of clashing, wagering, things like that. Wagering obviously not variance aspect, but clashing to a degree is. And it's much like in the same vein of if you're playing Rhinar or KO and you're discarding cards, you can kind of tailor and sculpt that variance in your odds to a degree. But this is a new element of variance to the game that may be a departure from what others may have kind of adhered to Flesh and Blood as being like, this is a game of not necessarily predictability, but the best player will win based off the fact that there's very few random elements to kind of mess you up. In this case, is this kind of a little bit more of a departure from that reliability and that stability towards more elements?
I mean, the best player who's built their deck for the element of variance they're trying to control is still going to win. Like, you're not just clashing randomly, you're building a deck that will win clashes. And if you lose one at the wrong time, okay, it's a bit of variance, but it's kind of like the difference between rolling a dice for Scabskin Leathers and being screwed on a 1 is the difference between making 90% of your deck hits for Clash and not using your Clash cards against heroes that you're not going to win the clashes on. Like, if I'm building Victor, I'm putting in loads of cards that are going to win clashes, and I'm taking those cards out if I'm playing against someone who might win the clashes that I want to win and get the tokens that I want to get.
A variance to not just hype up the excitement in game, but also, I mean, it's a way to bring in or give players who might not be the elite chances to have those big minor victories even within a particular turn sequence. Is that something you guys are actively looking to explore more?
Yes, I think discrete variance events are very, very good when the foundation of your game is such a low variance foundation as it is with Flesh and Blood. And there's limits to that. You know, every time I talk about variance, I think people get very nervous. They think the game will become an RNG fest. We are huge fans of the core of Flesh and Blood. We're not trying to rewrite history. We don't want our game to be other games.
No one wants another Hearthstone. I mean, come on. The second they started adding play a random mage spell and stuff like that, the game went downhill massively.
We aren't trying to get to that world. We are just trying to healthily introduce a little bit more variance, have a little bit more fun with it, let these events happen. And yes, I think Heavy Hitters is a very, very good illustration of how we want to do those things. And great players are still going to win a lot in Heavy Hitters. Like, I don't think you're going to see win rates plummet and all of a sudden they feel like they have no control over their outcomes.
And if one, like, mid player massively high rolls every single clash into the best player in the world and wins one game against them, that's a price worth paying for that person feeling fantastic for a day. Like, genuinely, I think it is. In terms of the health of the game, I think that's a price worth paying. And it's not going to happen that often, and that's probably going to happen in the Swiss, and the good player will still go on 9-1 and win and get into the top 8 and all that kind of stuff. But that one victory for the other player who just, you know, high-rolled every single clash, it's going to feel pretty good. So, you know, if it happens, it happens.
Still get infinite decisions to make along the course of the game. They're going to do the smart thing the vast majority of the time. That's going to benefit them. The vast majority of the time, they're going to win a lot. Stays consistent. But it's going to be upended once in a while. And I think it's going to feel really, really good for players on the other side. And it's going to tell great stories. I mean, you covered that finals match where the clashes were just absolutely breaking in favor of the Warrior over and over and over. And you saw how much excitement it added. Like, honestly, in the room, people gathered around the monitors to watch. You just heard it across the over and over and over. Like, it did its job so effectively.
It was an extra layer that I have been missing from this game. I mean, having done Gwent for 5 years, there's a lot of random elements of, okay, at the end of the turn, damage a random thing, and it's like, okay, it's a 1 in 8 that this could potentially win you the round, and you take these risks, and there's a lot of excitement in that regard. And obviously that was lacking to a degree in Flesh and Blood because a lot of the variables were solved. It was just solved on one side. As a broadcaster, I knew all the pieces going in, but this is a whole other element that I'm so glad is here, because from my selfish perspective of making the game more exciting to spectate, this is the right recipe, that there are going to be heroes in there that want to clash. And what I'm truly waiting for, Bryan, is for everybody to have their little superstition or their little habit or their wind up for the clash. And like when I was doing it, I would slide the card to the middle of the combat zone, or the combat chain. I'd rub it around, get it nice and warm, and then reveal it on the same time to get a little bravado going on. And some players were starting.
He does have a point there. Like, I'm very terrified that when I clash, I'm going to accidentally reveal 2 cards. So I'm actually going to have to make sure I draw one separately with my right hand while I keep my hand of cards in my left hand. Take it, draw it, put it on the middle, flip it up, and then put it back carefully. Because my terrified thing is that I'm going to reveal 2 cards by accident.
Starting to do that, and that's what I like, is that a little bit of the personality and that flair gets injected into the game, and that is awesome. That is so awesome. Now, another part of the excitement of broadcasting this game is the names of the cards, Bryan, and I this is something that you and I were definitely talking about. And you know, some of them were like, is this a Bryan card? Like, there's a lot of the poker related cards.
So I am curious about the card names in the set, and I feel like a lot of them are like poker, and some of them are a bit on the nose, and some of them are a bit crude and lewd, shall we say. But again, I think this is a segment that you really should just go and watch Flair. I don't think I'm going to add huge amounts to it. I'm not overly critical. I understand the humor in which a lot of these cards were intended. So I'm going to skip over that section again. If you want to hear about card names, go and jump and watch this video of Late Shadow. We're going to jump to the bad take section, just because I feel like there's elements in here that I may either be guilty of myself or have encouraged in other people. I feel like it's just worth listening to what Bryan has to say.
You are very well known for just being fearless to a degree of confronting bad takes, and just sometimes just saying, hey, like, you're just wrong. And this is, I want to paraphrase something that you said to me and Craig. We were having ramen the other day, and we're just chatting about some random stuff, and we're just talking about bad takes and this and that. And you mentioned something, and I'm paraphrasing, you can correct me here, but like, what happened to just someone being flat out wrong? When a bad take is just a bad take and they're wrong, why do I have to give somebody the benefit of the doubt or give somebody more than one thought when what they're saying is just flat out stupidity and wrong? I want you to elaborate or maybe correct me what I'm saying there. That was a paraphrase, but that was part of our conversation, which I think is, I'm very much the same way. In the same way of, like, you know, punch a bully in the face, I'm the same way of, if somebody is just being unreasonable and has a really wrong and bad take, you know, don't be...
I mean, there's 2 ways to argue with the internet. You either argue with the quality of the person you're arguing with, or you argue with the quality of their thoughts. I mean, sometimes people make takes that are not good, but there is a kernel of interesting truth there, and sometimes people make takes that are bad, dumb, and are dumb and come from dumb and have nothing but dumb behind them. And it's kind of important. Sometimes you need to help your person you're arguing with find the best form of their argument, and sometimes it's really not worth the energy. More the latter, I would say, than the former on the internet, especially on Twitter. Yeah.
Like, aggressively angry and vile about it, but say, no, this is wrong because XYZ. I want you to talk a little bit maybe about...
Well, it's more that just, like, it seems to be you get like, if you type up your tweet and you put hot take : at the front of it, and then you just get to say the dumbest shit possible, that makes no sense to me. Like just because you put those 2 words in front of something does not give you license to say something which is demonstrable.
It's true. People use hot take very, very wrong. A, if everyone has already said it, it's not a hot take. B, if it's obvious, it's not a hot take. A hot take is, you guys are all wrong. Betsy is the best hero in Heavy Hitters, and here's why. A hot take is not, wow, Levy is going to get powered up by these brute cards.
Demonstrably false and not rooted in reality whatsoever. And then we all have to be like, well, he said it's a hot take, so I'm not going to call that out. Like, no, that's just dumb. And people
I agree with
engage with it as if it's something that is potentially real, and it shapes their mind state, it shapes their decisions going forward. And how about you just say the take if you believe it to be true, and then you get blown up for it if it's really dumb and really bad.
I mean, sometimes it's just people putting out fun stuff about the game on Twitter, and they're not that emotionally invested in what they're saying. I think I see a lot of that. I see a lot of people being like, oh, what if it's like this? And it's like, well, it's probably not, but you kind of engage with it because it's fun and you've got nothing else to do. You're having a pretty lazy evening, for example.
That seems like a much braver way to go about things, as opposed to just being like, hot take, here's the stupidest thing you've ever heard. And when you call me out on it, I'll just be like, bro, it was a hot take. It's kind of like it was a prank. Like, you did something
a prank, bro.
Stupid and annoying, and you deserve to be told why it's not correct or why it's harmful to have that quote unquote hot take. Like very much entering my old man yelling at clouds phase. I have considerable concerns about the way social media warps our world and reality and the way we interact with each other as humans, and sort of like the Celebrational enforce that, where I mean, I have no issues with anyone who attended the Celebrational, but it was clear how much more genuine and direct and fruitful conversations were when we were all just sitting down together and talking and brought together in the same space. And
all right, let's just pause for a second, right? Additive content, this is what we're all about. Let's have a look at the uses of the word hot take within the Fab TCG hashtag, right? Search settings, we want to do it latest, right? Let's see what we have recently. Meta predictions, okay. Hot take, the top 8 will completely shock us. It was obvious at the beginning. Well, that's more of a criticism of tier lists. I don't think the top 8 is going to completely shock us at all. I think some of the takes are pretty good. My hot take is that Fab after this weekend is a very fun limited set. That's not a hot take. Everyone is saying that. Hot take. Other people are getting to see their cards a few will not make your dude. That's not a hot take either. It's just blatantly true. But if they beat you in either one of those first 2 rounds, it would make your 0-2 drop pool any better. You're going to lose to a sealed pool. People who got the list 3 to 4 days earlier, you probably won't close. That's not true either. I mean, these are good players. They might beat you with the additional advantage. I look it when classes get good cards that give players of the class hype, even when it's not my class. Okay, that's kind of a hot take because some people just like it when their class gets good cards. He's saying, my hot take is I like it when everyone gets good cards. Not sure about that. Not so hot take. Fab 2.0 heroes won't consistently make top 8 or win tournaments until the Fab 1.0 heroes living legend. This is not a hot take because the Fab 1.0 heroes are better and they have better action point economy. My hot take for Fab TCG Worlds, Dromai will win, no tome registered. This isn't a hot take. Dromai was quite a good deck, but, Fi was in the meta. I don't like the Living Legend update. Not a hot take. Lots of people, didn't like that Living Legend rotation update. 2024 is going to see the All Arcane set James talked about. Not a hot take because he talked about the set, and the odds are that... if he's talking about a set, that it is mostly through design and, therefore he can talk about it. This is not a hot take. It's a great game. I enjoy the community we've developed. That's not a hot take. It's just true. The great game is fantastic. Hot take, I'm satisfied with Fab. Now you're just memeing. Let's finish with Diablo. Hot take, Pirates should become a class in 2024. We already have currency established, a new wager mechanic, allusion to the open ocean, and Pirates depicted on multiple cards. I agree with this. This is a hot take. It's not a hot take because hot takes are like left field opinions on things, but it is a nice way to take the discussion. All right, look, we've seen some hot takes. Let's get back. I couldn't find whatever one he was talking about, which must have been recently. But what can you do?
I think that I get frustrated by the state of internet discourse, and
we all get frustrated by the state of internet
more
discourse.
And more into it over time, and I'm just like, why can't we get back to genuine conversations, true explorations of these things, rather than just bite-sized garbage that we spew out there in order to get engagement?
Well, I've got some good news there for you, Brian, because the whole purpose of my channel is to have fruitful, engaging discussions about Flesh and Blood, where we cover not just the hot take, but also the nuance. So, if you are like Bryan and you did like that kind of discussion, content like this, where we analyze and we talk and we give people the benefit of the doubt, maybe you should subscribe to my channel, because you've been watching quite a lot of this video now, and you know, I think you probably like the way I sound. I think we can go out on a limb and we can say that, right? Anyway, let's get back in and finish this off.
It frustrates me, and that is an issue bigger than Flesh and Blood. It honestly is kind of unrelated to Flesh and Blood in most ways. It certainly happens in that space, but it's not born of that space. It's symptomatic of broader issues with how we engage with each other, how we speak with each other. And yeah, I'd like to see it get better. Like, part of me just wants Flesh and Blood to be this bastion for everything good in the world. That's never going to happen. Like, that is an unfair burden.
No, because it's full of TCG players who are notably and remarkably known as being toxic, try-hard, competitive, you know, Pro Tour winning wannabes who all assume that they're going to be the person who's going to win the next tournament if they just shark everyone, right? I mean, I'm joking, of course, but that, you know, we are both a representative of society as a whole as TCG players and a microcosm of a different culture in society where competitive people are lauded and people who are casual are not always taken as seriously, and that itself does have the tendency to create toxic cultures and behaviors. And we are in a weird place in the world. This is just me speaking as someone who is a market research analyst, and you know, it is my job to track consumer trends. One of the things I do, you know, we're at a stage in the world where digital access to companies has gone to the point where we expect our tweets to be answered and we expect our engagement to come from multiple levels of companies, and we don't think that our opinions are invalid or that they shouldn't be considered by the people at the top of the company. And I am guilty of this, but I mean, I am slightly different because I am trying to act you know, as we'll call it consumer mouthpiece or voice of the consumer, enlightened by my career choice, by things I admire from journalists and things like that. So I tend to amplify people's positions, and I definitely, because of that, have the issue with ego that I think my opinion and the opinion I'm trying to communicate is the most valid one. And partly that's because when I come on here and say things, it's sometimes what I think and sometimes what I read a lot of people say, or I see a lot of people struggle with, and I try and crystallize that community discourse into what I think the voice of the fab consumer would try and say if it could be crystallized into one viewpoint. So when I come out and say, oh, I don't think Bright Lights is selling well, I don't think a lot of people are buying it, I feel like, you know, that resonates, but it resonates partly because I've seen 30, 40, 50, 60 discussions of people say, hey, I was going to buy a case, but I don't want to now. I was going to, like, all the things that come together to make that image. And part of my job then is passing data like that through that qualitative lens and trying to arrive at a conclusion. And ultimately, you have to try and arrive at that conclusion in a place where you think that point you're making is one that's valid and worth being heard, right? So I suffer from the ego of my opinion is valid and people should listen to it, but I also try and form those opinions through a crux sort of nexus of dialogue and discourse with the community that makes sense. So, you know, it's an interesting point, but it's definitely true that we are in this point where we expect responses, and interestingly, you know, as the amount of automation in the customer service industry increases, we are going to be getting quite tailored and personalized responses from companies. But that doesn't mean that company is engaging with us. It just means that the bot that they've created is better at pretending to be empathetic. So, you know, Coca-Cola doesn't really care that you found a worm in your bottle, but the bot that they've set up to respond to customer queries is going to pretend to care, and they're going to send you a free case of whatever drink from Coke you want. But that doesn't mean you've engaged with a real person, but you're going to feel like you're more entitled to engage with real people because of the fact that you're getting these instant responses from companies. And then that has a knock-on effect to small companies who can't field that level of engagement because they don't have the resources and they can't afford the technology. And then you have this situation where people like Bryan, who are, we'll say, one of the outward spokespeople of the company, is being bombarded with people who expect him to respond, because if Coca-Cola could respond to my tweet, then surely Bryan Gottleib from Tiny Fab TCG, which I give hours of my life to play in tournaments and and things can respond as well, without realizing that actually Coca-Cola has the resources to put in automated technology to respond to thousands of tweets a day, whereas Bryan is just one person who's going to try and argue with you on Twitter if you come up with some dumb shit that he feels like he has to deal with. It's a pretty big difference, but I can say that as someone who's actually an expert in customer experience and contact centers and things like that, we are in the middle of this changing paradigm of consumer expectations with regards to corporate behavior and from the companies we buy things from. And I feel like that will impact LSS and other smaller companies in ways that are yet unforeseen as the increased amount of automation rolls out. If you found this discussion interesting, you could find my company pod. I'm just joking. It does exist, but I'm not going to tell you what it is because I keep my personal and private life separate. My professional and my private life separate.
Into place on a TCG, but I would love if we just did some things differently than broader society, and I think we do. Like there are things that we do very, very well, and we are broadly. I don't want to say these problems are solved, but we broadly are more welcoming, more accepting, with certainly sad exceptions along the way. But I just want more of that. I want more of Flesh and Blood being like the best possible place to exist in.
Whenever somebody starts something with like no offense, but it feels like they've just been promoted to 00 status and they get licensed to kill. Like they can just say whatever they want. No offense, but, and then they get to say it. And you're right, because it's a prank, bro. When I was on the Fab cruise playing poker, one of the dudes across from me found out that I was Canadian, and that was going to be his whole thing, where he's talking about how America's better than us. And I was like, okay, I don't care. And then he's like, I'd rather have Biden than Trudeau. I said, cool. You don't even have to make a choice. Like that's not even in your
Turns
wheelhouse.
Out they're in two separate places.
Yeah, I'm like, that's cool. I'm not
guys.
trying to sell him to you. It's all right. We're not open for trades. And then he's like, we saved you. We saved you. I said, from what? He said, the communists. I said, cool. And then he's like, I'm smarter than you. I said, I unless you're Dr. something, I don't care, And then afterward, he kept going and kept antagonizing. And I'm just trying to have a good time. It's me, it's Logan Peterson, it's Charmer and a bunch of other people. And everybody else at the table's getting really uncomfortable. And I started like fighting back. I said, where did you go to school? How do you know you're smarter than me? He's like, well, you're just 20 something. I said, that is the kindest thing you have said to me. Thank you so much.
Win.
I said, I said, I appreciate that so much. I said, however, I'm like, why can't we just be friends? Like, why are you making this so antagonistic? He's like, I'm just joking around, man. I said, no, you're not. I said, because I was not engaging, so it's no longer a joke because no one's laughing. So I put my.
It's a pretty good take. It's only a joke if people are engaged and laughing. Otherwise, you're just being mean.
Hand out. I said, can we shake hands and just move on? And he's like, sure, man. He's like, I don't know what you're getting all riled up about here. I said, I'm not. I said, I'm like, but you can't have it both ways. Like, either we're doing this or we're not. And I would much prefer not to, It was like one of those things. I'm like,
this is good communication. You should take, but people should listen to this, should take lessons to Fluke. Someone is talking at you rather than with you. Put a stop to the conversation. Say, look, this is where the dialogue's going. I'm not super happy with it. Can we just move on to a different conversation? This is like 10 out of 10 points for communication and conflict resolution. So, yeah, hats off. Well, he's got his hat on, but, I just want to call out that's pretty good.
Total jackass. Anyways.
Poker was a weird place, man. One of the reasons I eventually moved away from that was just some very, very bad actors. Great people, too. I don't want to cast too broad a net, but yeah, that was routine at the poker tables. You had to engage with things like that, and it was just like accepted as culture. And it was garbage, and nobody should have to go through that.
Well, that was it. And I was like, I'm like, there's no cameras here. You're not like, are you trying for a sponsorship? Are you trying to we're just having fun. Like we're playing, 1-2.
Never go to like a university or a secondary school like reunion. If you're listening to this and you went to the sort of university where it matters, like you're going to go into the room and people are going to start comparing like salaries and careers and relationships. And if you went to one of the universities where that thing is seen as a status symbol by the wrong people, you're going to have a really boring evening. I'm just putting that out there. I didn't even go to I went to Trinity College Dublin. I went to probably the best university in Ireland, arguably. definitely not like it's on the list of best universities in the world, but it's not like stellar in terms of thing. But it is in Dublin, so it's really nice. But sometimes you go to these meetings and people are like, well, what did you do? And I have the benefit, and like the only real benefit really is that I went to university with people who've done very, very well and are in politics. One of them, people I knew from my debating society, is now a best-selling novelist. We weren't close. We were, acquaintances. We were in the same debating society, so social acquaintances and those kind of things. My point is, I just get to put the metric stick down. It's that I'm not going to keep up with those people. And I don't want to. So my point is that kind of like attitude of things, it is best avoided. We're getting off fab now. I'm tangenting because this has been such a long video, but I definitely agree with this take. You don't need to measure your, genitalia against other people. You can just say, that's all right, let's not have this discussion. And that applies to fab Twitter as well, guys. You can tone it down. You can be more kind. You can be more generous. You can help people find the best form of an argument. You have it in you. I believe you do. Not to be patronizing. I have it in me too. I should probably not be on Twitter when I'm tired. But I feel like I moderate the good and the bad quite a lot in my tweets.
Poker here, like what
micro stakes poker.
Yeah,
this guy wants to bully someone at the table.
That was it. And he was like, at one point, the blinds come around, and I had a hand, and I wanted to raise, and I put my chips in the middle, and I didn't call raise. And by the rules, if you don't call the raise, you're just calling the bet. He's like, whoa, you can't do that. That's just a call, dealer. That's just a call. I said, whoa. I said, all right. I'm like, didn't know that we're, rule sharking at a 1-2 table here, but I adhere to whatever the rule is here. I intended to raise, but now I don't. But now I have good cards, And then he goes around and he like raises on top of me, and I just folded. I'm like, I do not want to get in on this. You can have my $2. Congratulations.
Enjoy.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
All right.
Good shot.
We've got a bunch of questions from the community that I want to rifle through here. I don't know if we'll get to all of them. You are usually a lightning rod, you and James, for all kinds. So I've weeded out a lot of the, hey, what's your favorite hero and such.
We're going to do a bit of this. We'll see how it's going.
It is clearly Arachne, right?
We're gonna do a bit of this, then we're gonna see how it's going. We're already in an hour and something. In fact, actually, no. Let's cut it off there. Community questions. I think that's the perfect thing for you to go and watch Flake's video to get insight on. He's going to put a bit of flair on them. I don't think we're going to see any massive like design revelations. Maybe I'll listen to it later and do a follow-up video. We're at an hour and a half. I think this has been a really fantastic interview. There's been some really interesting design bits. As a reminder, if you've watched this, you owe a watch to Flake. Go and just look at his video, put it on in the background, listen to the bits that I haven't covered. I always like to leave some bits that I think are interesting that I haven't talked about. Listen to what Bryan thinks about his meme, which is really good. Like, I think that would be really interesting. Listen to his thoughts about the Celebrational, listen to his thoughts on card names, and listen to all these community questions, your questions answered by him, and kind of do that. There's also, I think, a giveaway at the end, so go and tune into that giveaway if you want to potentially win. Let's move out of the way, because obviously this was sponsored by The Realm, so do give a bit of shout outs to them as well. Obviously not my sponsor. I don't have a sponsor. If you want to sponsor me, get in touch. We'll work it out. But Flake does, so they deserve promotion for the fact that he has gone and done this video. So if watch the Realm Games Invitational, go and go to their store if you're local. Fantastic shot, great casters. And that's it. Thanks a lot for listening. Talk to you all soon.